We're hopeful that you'll get something out of today, and I'll be presenting, as Vanessa said, alongside Brandon Orr, who is our Chief Technology Officer. And something that I'm really proud of with Brandon is he's a certified ethical hacker. So that means he knows what he's doing. He knows how to do all the bad things that many of the bad actors do out there, but he doesn't do them. He practices them to make sure that we can put preventative measures in place. So I know that many of you work with success, and I'm also aware that some of you do not. So I figured I'd share a little bit about who we are. First, we are a managed services provider, otherwise known as an outsourced IT provider. We've been in business for almost 30 years. We're almost 100 employees, and we've been in Golden Valley for almost the entirety of our tenure. Something I'm very proud of is we've been recognized for the past 4 years running as one of the top workplaces in the Star Tribune Top 150. We're also a managed security services provider. So when Target was breached back in 2013, we as an organization sat down and thought, what we're doing probably isn't going to be enough for businesses in the future, and we better develop a security practice. So we've been doing this for almost 7 years now. And this year, we were recognized by Computer Reseller News as one of the top 100 security providers in the United States. That's something that I'm extremely proud of, and it is in large part due to Brandon and his team's work. And then lastly, and most importantly, I think we're a Microsoft partner. We always have been, and we're 365 specialists. And this year, we won Ingram Micro's Cloud Summit Award for our Communications and Collaboration Partner of the Year award in our work in Teams. So Vanessa and a few others in our organization established a practice for how to move into Teams and away from legacy servers, and works on organizations with their digital transformation. So we'd love to talk to you about that if you're interested. I think it's important because to recognize our veterans today. Today is Veterans Day, and we're fortunate to have a couple of gentlemen that served in the armed forces. One of the benefits in working at Success Computer Consulting is one of the ways we honor our veterans is to provide them this day off. And so they're not here today, thankfully. They're enjoying the benefits of veterans and all the free food that comes along with the restaurants that are participating. My wife, too, is a veteran, so I know how much she works towards kind of scheming as to which restaurants to go to. But I just wanted to make sure and say thank you to our veterans and anybody on the call that served as well. And then a special thanks to one of our clients, the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans. You can find them on the web at mac-v.org. Their mission is to end veteran homelessness. And I figured I'd bring them up, not just because today is Veterans Day, but because Give to the Max Day is coming up a week from tomorrow on the 19th. And if you do participate in Give to the Max Day, we'll hope you consider MacV as one of your donation partners. Today in the session, we're going to talk about why cybersecurity is still a problem and the fact that it's more prevalent than ever. Brandon's going to show you how easy it is to compromise you or your network, your business network. This is scary stuff. Every time I see it, I learn something new. I'm going to walk you through some of the challenges that still exist and what we see when we assess new business networks. And then I'm going to talk, or Brandon will talk about what you can do. He'll share a framework and some steps you can take to strengthen your position. And then lastly, we'll talk about how to market cybersecurity as a strategic asset. So I want to get into some of the headlines. There's not a week that goes by where I don't see something in the news about another business that has been hacked. And in this case, 2 months ago, Tyler Technologies, located in a suburb of Dallas, they provide software services to government entities. They were hit by ransomware. Not soon after that, you may have read about this in the Star Tribune. Many of the local hospitals were under compromise because of a software provider that they use called Blackbaud. We're very familiar with Blackbaud because many of the nonprofits that we work with use that software specifically. They were compromised. And then we issued a warning 2 weeks ago about the threat against our healthcare system. There were some credible reports, as warned by the FBI and other organizations, that bad actors were targeting our healthcare system. And that feathered down into not just the major hospitals, but a lot of the smaller organizations that support healthcare as well. So we were on red alert and doing all we could to make sure that our clients were protected. And the last one I'm going to share with you is a little different. So we all know Tesla. We likely all love their cars, but hackers don't always get in by phishing emails or penetrating your network the traditional way. Sometimes they leverage employees directly, and in this case, a hacker from Russia, allegedly, contacted an employee of Tesla and offered to pay that employee initially $500,000 to load software onto his computer that would have then compromised the Tesla network. When he initially rebuffed their efforts, they bumped their offer to $1 million. And this employee, thankfully, was honest and cared about his company and doing the right thing and engaged with the company and the FBI. And the FBI was able to arrest this hacker on his way to Los Angeles Airport, or LAX. So they were able to thwart that. And I bring that up just because it's important to know they will leverage anything and everything they can to get through to your business. Why? Because you have money, or your business has money or intellectual property that they want that they can sell and distribute and use. One of the things we hear regularly in our work, especially in the market segment that we serve, which is small and medium-sized businesses, is that I'm too small. My business isn't something that you'd hear about in the papers. I'm not nationally recognized. And that is one of the biggest myths out there. Many small businesses are attacked. In fact, I would bet that more small businesses fall victim than large businesses do, because we represent so much potential revenue for the bad guys. And Brandon, I want to ask you, you have a pretty large security operations center, lots of great talent in there. You guys always seem busy. And we only deal with small business. Can you share a little about what you see as it relates to compromise in small business?
Sure. So yeah, a lot of kind of the things that don't make the news is the fact that around 70% of all breaches and attacks are targeted towards small business. And so we really see kind of the gambit here of the different types of attacks. Now, the one that the Tesla was that Brent was referring to, we don't necessarily see this kind of espionage type thing too much. But we do see that type of threat's called the insider threat, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But what we do see is employees doing the wrong thing, and sometimes they don't even realize they're the insider threat. And so we do see this type of, at least the labeling of that kind of threat happen inside of SMB. And I'll just give you a couple of stats that we see personally here at Success is when an attacker is successful in our market, it's about a 50K. It's about 50K to resolve that, to remediate whatever that was, whether it's ransomware or just a breach of some sort. The other interesting thing is, if you don't have the right visibility and insight, they're in your network for roughly 140 days right now, is the average. But what they don't talk about when they talk about that 140 days, once you recognize them, it's about 70 days before you're confident that they're out of your network. So there is we see this, I think we're running between prospects and legacy clients around 2 to 3 breaches per quarter. That major breaches per quarter is what we're seeing. So we hear these things in the news, but it's very prevalent in the SMB market.
Yeah, Brandon, thanks for sharing that. We talk about this a lot whenever we discuss cybersecurity, but for those of you that don't know, when the Target breach happened, that was the direct result of a small business, a 20-person company out of Pennsylvania, an HVAC provider that was doing some refrigeration work. Target let them on the network. The hacker was able to get on. It's just important to know that we are as susceptible as anybody else, and we're bigger targets because we don't take this seriously. I don't mean Success. We take it very seriously. And I know if you're a client of ours, you're tired of us talking about it, but we're going to continue to until you're all safe. That's our lifelong work. Now, Brandon, I know that I'm going to hand things off to you, and you're going to show our audience how easy it is, and then we'll go from there.
Certainly. Here, let me just share my screen. All right, how are we doing? Do we see my demo time? Thumbs up. Okay. So this slide kind of lies to you a little bit. I'm not going to do a demo right away. I want to get into a couple of things first and really kind of set the tone for how we're going to continue here in the next few slides. So let me click on that so I can get next. So today, I want to walk you through kind of the mind of an attacker, and we'll take the journey with me here. We'll talk about some things that might seem a little technical. Stick with me. It's I keep it pretty high level, but I want to show you what this looks like and kind of bring you along with me on this kind of journey. When I do these for specific companies and I do a live attack, I'll target that company theoretically and show them some vulnerabilities that I could have exploited, and then in a simulated environment exploit them. And so we're going to look at that simulated environment today. My simulation, I've been doing this one for about 3 years now, so it's getting a little long in the tooth, but the reality is it's still very, very relevant. And that's kind of odd when you think about technology and how fast technology moves. And so just keep in mind, we might see some older technologies. The reason I really like this demo is it's visual. A lot of the newer, more potent attack tools today aren't as visual, so take the journey with me. I want to start by kind of demystifying who's attacking you. A lot of times we have this mystic figure in a hoodie that is, kind of cyber omnipotent, that he can just do anything they want. The reality is it's a team of people that come after you, and typically organized crime. And some of those roles are the mule. The mule here, if we look at the Tesla attack, was somebody trying to get somebody to do something inside the organization. The professional in that particular situation was the one who wrote the payload or contrived kind of the ruse that they were going to attack the company with. Nation state attackers, this is more, the Russia involvement here, that's a nation state. The activists would be more along the lines of they have a moral purpose to their attacks. And so they're attacking typically companies or entities that they feel are immoral or at least against their cause. The getaway, or sometimes referred to as the script kiddies, but nowadays sometimes these younger kids are more sophisticated than the experienced ones. But these are just usually underage kids that have some knowledge and they're attacking. And then finally, the insider, this is kind of what we were talking about before. Inside the Tesla attack, the insider would have been the person who actually took the money and then took the payload and delivered that payload. So again, this is just a team of people. So now we know who. Let's kind of talk about how. Well, Lockheed Martin, and this is kind of where it gets a little technical, but stick with me. I think it's pretty easy to follow this as we get into the attack. But Lockheed Martin came up with this a number of years ago, and I think it's a great way of articulating how an attack happens. This is really the formula of how most of the attacks happen. First, there's reconnaissance. They look at certain databases or information on the web and the dark web to learn about your company. Sometimes it's just your website too. Then they take that information and they weaponize it. And then they craft a delivery mechanism. 91% of all breaches today happen due to spear phishing emails. That's one of the primary vectors, but other ways too, like the Teslas, you're delivering it from an insider threat perspective. Then once they figure out how they're going to deliver it, they figure out how they're going to get it exploited inside the organization, installed, and then command and control. This is where, and we'll see this today, where a victim machine reports into the command machine, and now I have full control over that particular machine. And we'll talk a little bit about what we do next. Action on objectives, number 7 here, is really just about, now that I have command and control, now I have hands-on keyboards is what they call it a lot of times. I have control over that machine, and now I can start to learn even more about your whose ever machine that is, the network, and how to move laterally and elevate privileges to gain more and more control over the network before I launch my final payload, typically today, which is ransomware. All right, now we've gotten through that. Now it's demo time for real. Again, this is a, let me back that up a little bit. There we go. This is a simulation. We'll kind of walk through. I'll talk through the 7 steps as we go through it. So just some housekeeping here. I have 2 machines set up, and I'll kind of be switching between them, and I want to make sure we're able to follow. Our victim machine is labeled victim, and then our hacker machine or attacker machine is just this server here that we'll move over to in a little bit. But when I look at my victim machine, this is just my user. It's a Windows 7. Like I said, it's a little long in the tooth, but oddly enough, I see a lot of Windows 7 out there, so it's still very, very relevant. Everything I'm showing you today works on Windows 10. Windows 10 is a little bit more of a cat and mouse game to keep it working. Windows 7 works no problem. So what I want to do today is kind of walk through this idea of reconnaissance and weaponization and really the 7 steps, but let's start with reconnaissance. Now, we're just going to craft a spear phishing email today, and it's very easy to do. I have a fake account here that is in Outlook.com or Live.com, and I sent this particular account to mimic somebody getting an email with an Office attachment. And the idea here is that I'm trying to set some sort of urgency to this, and you can see I have my name up here and things like that, but I can change all of this. I can make it look like it comes from anybody. And a lot of times when I do this for specific companies, I'll craft the attack really targeted towards them around, maybe the person I'm targeting in that company, whether it's HR or the director of operations or something like that. I can make it look like it is either coming from them or somebody that they know. And then again, we're learning a little bit about the company, so we want to look relevant. So I'll learn about other people in the company and maybe reference them in the email. Okay. So then at that point, we're starting to, the email is starting to look more legit. And that's really the goal here is I want them, and I kind of don't care who clicks on it. There is, the higher up you are, the more rights you have, the more access to digital assets you have, the better. But as long as somebody gets this and opens the document, that's my real goal. So from a reconnaissance perspective, I would learn about the company and then kind of craft the email a little bit towards the targeted person I'm going after. And then the weaponization here is usually when I do this for a targeted company, I give myself 15 minutes to do reconnaissance and 15 minutes to weaponize. So 30 minutes total, that's all I get, and I show this attack. So in this case, I've sent a new invoice, and it's please pay. Well, and maybe I'll send this to accounts payable. Hey, most accounts payable would open this invoice. And so let's see what happens when we do that. So now we're in the delivery phase of this cyber kill chain. And I downloaded it just for ease here. So here is the invoice. I literally, for this attack, I downloaded a template off of Microsoft's template site. This is all bogus data. But the only thing I changed was I put a little bit of code in the background, a macro, that when I click this bad code up here, you'll see the attack happen, or maybe not, we'll see. So when I click this, the attack is going to happen. And I know it's a little different over the web. In person, nothing happened. Over the web, there might be a little lag or whatever, still nothing happened. The reality is that this happens so quick and so fast. If we move over to now our command, so now this is the control server, now I have the command server in the background, now we see something reporting in. At this point, we have gone through reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, and installation. That's how fast an attack can happen. So now I literally have command and control, and I can have hands-on keyboard in just a moment. So let's take a look at what I can do when I'm in this. So let's, I'll just open up. And what's interesting here, and what's funny is when I do this for network admins and technical people, they always tell me like, I want that control over my network. I want to see all this data. I want to have this type of control. But the bad actors have that type of access. So that's kind of the scary thing here. Now I can look at certain things. I can monitor the CPU utilization and everything like that. But that's now fun. Let's take a look at just a couple of things and then we'll move on. But how many people, and you don't have to raise your hand or anything, but just think about it, store your passwords in your browser. When you log into something, your browser pops up, say, hey, I want to save this password, and you hit OK. I can grab those. So I can steal those passwords from that browser. Now, browsers are getting better and better, and it's kind of a cat and mouse game to get around that, but browsers are a very insecure way to save your passwords. So let's look at some of the spy functions. So one of the things here is I can listen to the machine. So if you're in a board meeting or something like that, I can listen to what's going on. I can take control of it, take control of the machine. So if I hit the capture, you'll see this is the machine we were just on. I can watch you. I can see what's going on. I can see when you're busy, when you're not busy. I can see your workflow. I can see who you're talking to. Then I know who maybe I need to go and attack. Because once I have access to this, the whole goal is to start to attack other machines on the network, move laterally, leverage the privilege I have to then escalate my privileges, getting more and more access. Close that. I can also watch you. I can go in here and I can hit the webcam, and now it's going through the VM and then sharing. There we go. So I can see what's going on. I can see what you look like. As an attacker from anywhere in the world, I can see who you are, what you look like, what's going on in your room. Very scary. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I promised you I wouldn't, but I've got a question.
Sure.
When I'm on live, my webcam lights up. Is it possible for you to hide that from me as the victim? If I don't, like, that would be easy for me to see if somebody was using my camera. Right. I see that.
Yep. Yeah. It's very easy to turn that off. It's an option in the attack software. So the type of software we're using is called a RAT, a remote access Trojan. And inside this software, this one's not as sophisticated. It's a little older, but the modern ones that we use, it's just a switch. The light doesn't turn on, camera's on, audio's on. We're able to control everything. I can even set it to not even turn on, but take a picture every 30 seconds and send it to me.
That's just so creepy. And I also wanted to call out what Brandon shared just a few minutes ago regarding how easy it is to change things, to make it to trick us. We worked with an organization 5 years ago that had that happen to them. They lost $240,000 by submitting invoices to a new bank that they were directed to send to as a result of a very minor change. I think they changed the I in their domain name to a 1 or an exclamation point. And we typically breeze right over those things.
Yep. Yeah. It's quite easy. And the thing is if they fail at one, they just keep coming at you. So it doesn't have to be successful the first time. They just have to be right once. So that's the webcam. A lot of times I'll hear this kind of argument. Okay, Brandon, we have offloaded all of our workloads to the cloud, even our desktops. We log into a desktop in the cloud. So we don't care about our endpoints. We don't care about this. As an attacker, I love hearing that because it makes it way easier for me to get something like this on that endpoint. Now, once I've breached your endpoint, it doesn't matter where your data's at. If your user can access it, I can access it. So this kind of myth about everything's in the cloud, even my desktops, and I can log in from anything, is really just a myth. Once I have access to this machine and I can see what you're doing, I can log. I'll just show you here real quick. Oops. I can do key logging. I can watch what you're doing, and I can save all the stuff you're typing, your passwords, where you're going, where those passwords are for. I can save all of that, and I can have that uploaded into a server, and I can even add some automation there, because then I can say, oh, are they logging into their bank account? Are they logging into some high valued asset? So I'll have the ability to see what's going on, even though your data may not be on that machine. If your user is using that machine to access the data, that is a high value asset to me. Okay, we'll stop here with this. We could go on a little bit further, but I think we've kind of set the tone here from a perspective of, once I have access, it's pretty bad. I have a lot of access and I have a lot of control. So let's go back to our presentation. I think the question is here, would you fall for this? Would someone in your organization fall for being sent an Office document that might be infected, or some sort of social engineering? And statistically, yes. We look at, and I'll just populate all of these so we can kind of read through them. 48% of all malicious email attachments are Office documents. It's a pretty staggering number. How many emails do you get? How many Office documents do you trade? 29% of all users fall victim to a phishing attack. So there's really roughly a 30% chance, if I sent this, you're going to click on it, you're going to open it. And even better, what you'll probably do, even if you're suspicious, is you'll forward it to your IT department, who's going to look at it. Your IT department likely doesn't understand how that particular malware works, especially if it's some of the new modern malware. Very hard to detect. And once they open it, now I have the keys to the kingdom right away, because they're probably running with admin credentials on their machine, statistically. And then finally, 33% of all organizations hit by ransomware pay the ransom. Why does this happen? Because they haven't prepared, they don't have a good backup solution, they don't have a great incident response. They ignored some of the really basic things, and they have to pay the ransom because they have no other option. Their data's gone. So kind of scary. Now, I want to preface this. We're selling a little FUD here, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and I am always hesitant to sell on that. And I'm not selling, but to present on that. But I do need to really have you understand there's real risk out there, but it's not doom and gloom. We can defend against some of this, and we can do some things, and oddly enough, it's some of the simplest things. We just have to pay attention to it. So where do we start? If we want to fix some of this, if we want to sleep better at night, how do we do that? Number one, in another slide here, I'll talk about a framework I really like, but subscribe to a framework. The idea here is that even if you have really good IT people working for you, or you have a really good IT company helping you out, if they don't subscribe to a framework, they're missing something. They're either missing key things they should be doing, or they're getting the priority of those particular steps wrong. And so a framework is going to help really be prescriptive about how to attack this. Use a multi-layered approach. There is no such thing as buying security. And if you're being sold something that is you're buying security, run. There's no such thing. Security is about visibility, insight, and knowledge. The idea here is that you have to educate your users, you have to educate your company, and that behavior has to change. Tools can only go so far. So that behavior change takes time. And so there's no such thing as I'm going to buy it today and tomorrow I'm secure. Number one thing for identity protection is implement multi-factor authentication. This is where I log in with a password, something I know, and then I use my phone to okay it or put in a code from my phone, or I use biometrics, eyes, face, fingerprints. So it's something you know, something you are, or something you have is really the multi-factor there. And you need 2 of those at least, sometimes more. And this one still kills me. Patch and update. Again, simple things we should be doing already. 86% of all breaches I think the stat's probably from 2018. It's a little older, but 86% of breaches that year were preventable because there was a patch already out. They just hadn't applied the patch. That's kind of crazy. This one's an interesting one too, because I get this a lot. Hey, we're HIPAA compliant. We check all the boxes. Compliance doesn't equal secure. So compliance is looking for usually a narrow focus, and it usually misses really broad strokes. My suggestion, that's why I kind of lead with a framework. My suggestion is subscribe to a framework, implement good security, report to compliance. That is a much easier and sustainable way to manage your security than chasing compliance. So just keep that in mind. And then this is another one I see missed a lot. Build a security culture. You need to test your users. You need to train your users. You need to monitor their dark web. We know passwords get reused. So if their LinkedIn password is breached, it's probably the same one they're using inside your organization. So know when that happens. Get alerted when there's a new data dump on the dark web. There's some tools out there that help us have that visibility and make those changes when that happens. But again, this is about changing behavior too, so you need to train your users. And then once you've trained them, you need to test them. All right, so here's the framework I really like. It's the CIS
Brandon,
controls. Yeah.
Before we move on, we do have a couple of questions, and I want to make sure they get addressed because it was about the previous content you were just explaining.
Sounds good.
The first question we have from the audience is saving passwords on a Safari browser safer than saving passwords on Chrome or Microsoft Edge?
I hate that question. Theoretically, yes. The way that Safari and the Mac OS, which I'm running a Mac right now, save passwords is they leverage the keychain, which is a proper password manager. Some security professionals would argue against that or whatever, but for the most part, it's a password manager. And that's the key, is that you're using a secure vault for the passwords, not just the browser. So then Safari links to the password manager. So the short answer is yes. There is some technical weird things that could happen there where your passwords would be exposed. So even though I don't dislike the keychain, and in some cases I even still use it, I leverage something outside of that that is it's called LastPass, and that's just the one I've chosen, which is a third party that's dedicated to that. So I don't want to rely on my operating system to kind of manage that. But although that's safer than saving it in Chrome or Edge or one of the other ones. So the reason I hate that question is because it is a little gray area there. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Thank you. So since we have so many different accounts and we're logging into so many different online applications, best practice is that we use unique passwords for each of those sites. So to this point, how are we supposed to keep track of all those passwords? Would you recommend using a third-party tool like a password manager?
Yeah, unless you have some ability to have a memory palace where it's all stored in there or whatever. But for the most part, a password manager is the way to go. And as oddly as this sounds, if you don't want to use a digital password manager, a lot of security professionals still like a notebook that's can be locked into a safe or something like that. But most sane people use a password manager.
Gotcha. Thank you. All right, last question here from our audience. Someone is asking, our cyber insurance underwriter has suggested that in some or many cases, it is less expensive to simply pay the ransom. What are your thoughts on this? So
that's an interesting one. In some cases, yes, but here's what happens. So there's a whole industry out there that's actually brokers. They broker the deal between the victim and the perpetrator to agree on a price and then broker it so that the keys to unlock it get transferred along with the money, and it's this whole thing. It's an industry, nearly a trillion dollar industry, actually. the problem with paying is that you're fueling the industry. So the argument from the FBI right now is that the reason this problem exists and is growing is because people are paying the ransom. So you're right, in some cases the ransom might be cheaper. I mean, you look at like a couple years ago or whatever, Atlanta, they chose not to pay, I think it was a $55,000 ransom, and I want to say it was in the millions to fix it. I don't remember the exact number, but it was in the millions. So that's a very true statement, but there's a moral piece to it too. But what, and I get the FBI gets this, but I've been in the room with a company who doesn't have data anymore, who can't work, who has 100, 200 people waiting for paychecks to do their job and can't do it. So that's probably it's not about the cost at that point, it's about the business surviving, and it's really hard not to pay it at that point. So the whole industry is a little bit in an argument over what's the right thing to do there. Oh, and I'll add one more thing to that, sorry. They'll also attack again. We actually just, we remediated a particular attack probably almost 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And just this last week, they got hit again. And granted, we were able to get it before it got to the destruction of data, but they were attempting to get back in.
Thanks, Brandon. We have one more question that just came in related to this. Do you know anything about Azure's password manager and if that is considered secure?
Yeah, Azure's, I'm blanking on the name right now off the top of my head. Credential Guard, I think, or something like that. Yeah, it's a fine password manager from an Azure perspective. We do see most people using third-party for endpoint password management, but that's just, I think, more preference than anything.
That's all we have for questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Good questions, very good questions. Even the Mac one was a good question. So moving along a little bit here with the CIS controls, this is a framework that helps us be it's a lot more prescriptive of what to do and where to focus. These are also talked about from a perspective of the top 20 critical security controls. CIS is a nonprofit. They have influence from thousands of security professionals and companies from around the world that help kind of prioritize and dictate what goes on this or participate in the list itself. And I'll tell you, the most incident responses that I assist in, if I look at number one on this list, every one of them wishes they did that better when they don't have access to their data, they don't have access to what workstations are supposed to be on the network, who has access to those workstations, and what's on those workstations. So 1 and 2 here, every time every company wishes they had a little bit better visibility to that. So then you kind of go down the list here, and then you continuous vulnerability management, understanding what's vulnerable on your network. You may or may not fix it, depending on the risk management piece of it, when you assess the risk of that vulnerability, but the awareness is so important. And then number 5 here, really secure configurations. Basically, you're putting out secure configurations for your hardware and machines and things like that by default, not waiting for a scan to find it. And then really the part of the behavior piece here is number 6. I'm not going to go through all 20. I don't want to go through the basic ones though. Number 6 is really looking at the logs. Now, a lot of people look at SIM here, where it's ingesting the logs, highly expensive. You don't have to do that. You can peer into them and get alerts for the logs themselves, like Windows logs and things like that. But your goal here is you want to see, when I talk about, we saw it right here. I had hands on keyboard. So now I can do whatever I want on that. if that particular user that I'm using logs into another machine that they've never logged in before, I want to know about that because that's an indicator of compromise. And so number 6 here is kind of talking about that. We want to know the lateral movement and elevation of privileges. If you're looking for that, looking at the anatomy of the attack, that's a high indicator somebody's in, and you can catch them early, way before that 140 days. So that's why even just the first 6 here are really important. Now, I don't want to make this sound like it's easy. This is not easy to do on any of these, and each one of these has sub-controls, and those sub-controls are very specific on what to monitor or look at. But we like how these roll up in kind of the top 20. They're very easy to consume and talk about. So just I like talking about this framework. There's other ones, NIST and things like that, but this is the one I find from an SMB perspective is very consumable. So then usually my next question is, okay, you've convinced me. I need to pay more attention to security, invest more in my IT department, and then how much should I spend on this? You know, I have a framework, I have a roadmap now. How much should I spend on it? That's a really hard question, but so I just offer this as a bit of advice on this particular slide. This is a slide by industry and average percentage spend in IT. Percentage of revenue spent on IT. What I want to call out here, and as you look at yourself and maybe your industry and what you're spending here, just know that this is an average. It's an average of immature companies and mature companies. So you kind of have to know where you're at and what your spend is to kind of measure yourself on here. And mean where you're at from a maturity level. Are you ad hoc? Are you not really paying attention to IT? Well, your spend might be a lot more to kind of get to good, and then the maintenance of that's a little easier to consume. So just an observation on this particular slide is really around the percentage is a blend of mature and immature companies here. So, and it's a little older too. I apologize for that. I've been looking for a newer one. I haven't found it quite yet. When I do, I'll update this slide. And then finally, I like to leave with some links and some a little bit more hope. Like you can walk out of here and feel like you can do something. And so I just put some links here. So Have I Been Pwned is a website run by Troy Hunt. He basically gathers when I talk about the dark web and these data dumps of passwords, he gathers all of that, loads it into a database, and lets you monitor that. So you can put your email address there and know what your email address has been breached and what part of what breach. So it's a great website, even just personally, to put some of your stuff there to see what's been a part of a breach. Then I linked the CIS controls, NIST also, if you want to take a look at that. And then a couple of we talked about password managers and how to create a secure password. I linked those to a blog entries that we have here, just so you can walk away and feel like you can take action.
Thanks, Brandon. We have one more question that I'd like your help with, and that is, what is recommended for monitoring logs without the cost of a SIEM? Am I pronouncing that right? SIEM.
Yeah, that depends on who you are, and for me, it depends on the day. Sometimes it's SIEM, sometimes it's SIM. And so there's a lot of tools out there to even just ingest logs, inexpensive. But we use a product called Cyberhawk that it peers into the logs and it doesn't ingest them, but it's looking for those behavior pieces, and it can do alerts. So, and the other really nice thing about that product is that we can tag high value assets. So it can look a little closer at your finance department or your C-suite versus the shop floor, that kind of thing. So that's the one we really like, and we found that it's in an SMB market, it's really kind of fits well. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles of a traditional SIM, but it gets us way further down the path of this kind of behavioral analysis. The other thing too is that if you have Office 365 and you're extending your identity into Office 365, the more you do that, the more you have this rich data around what that identity is doing just inherently with Office 365. And then you can apply different licensing to kind of extract more of that behavioral data out.
Hey, Brandon, I've got a question about that question in particular. Whether it's a SIM tool that's leveraged or it's something like CyberHawk, this was kind of what Target ran into also, and I'm sorry for continuing to bring that up, but Target had those kinds of tools on their network. They just didn't have the resources to pay attention to it and to like dig into the alerts. And so you can't, this is back to the point you made earlier, you can't buy security. You can buy a tool, but then you have to have the resources to both fine tune it and also pay attention to it, know what to do with it and what kind of alerts to respond to, right?
Correct, and you're dead on with the Target thing. Is they had all these tools. There was a lot of noise to them, and so that's why we really focus on this kind of discipline around visibility, insight, and knowledge. You have to have the right amount of visibility. Insight being the alerting that's generated from that visibility, and then the knowledge to apply to that and to react appropriately. And so that's an extremely important piece of the puzzle here, is really just having a balance between that visibility, insight, and knowledge, for sure.
Thanks. Vanessa, do we have any other questions, or is it okay to move on?
It is okay to move on.
All right. Well, we're going to switch gears here. Hopefully you can see my screen. It should say why the challenge still exists. And I'm going to talk about what we see when we get an opportunity to work with a new organization. Now, what we do is not too unlike many providers. We assess environments, and this year we've had an opportunity to assess over 50 new business networks. And I want you to think about this kind of like what it's like when you go to a primary care physician for the first time. We're just taking a look at the basics. We don't have an opportunity to dig in with real depth. We dedicate a half day of engineering time that we give away for free on the front end to assess environments. And I'm going to share with you what we see. And these are thematic, and I'll go through them. Brandon's already covered some of it to an extent, so I'm not going to go too much in depth, but here's what we see when in the 50 networks that we've managed that we've assessed so far this year. We see legacy operating systems or unsupported operating systems. We're still seeing Windows XP, Windows 7, older server operating systems. We still see organizations that are operating on a legacy email platform. The reason that's important, and this was already emphasized by Brandon, is it doesn't matter how much security you have built into your infrastructure. If you have one of these legacy operating systems on the network, Microsoft is not patching them, and it is literally the weakest link in the chain. And it is easy to compromise that link, no matter how much security you have. So the point here is you got to get rid of those things, you got to upgrade. The other thing that we see is a lack of password policies. Now, I'm surprised, given where we're at these days with banking and other things where we have to have complexity in our passwords, that organizations are not yet forcing people to at least put some complexity into their passwords. Some organizations don't have anything by way of even changing passwords with any level of frequency. We see some organizations that have never changed passwords since they implemented since they recently, whenever they last put a new operating system in for their server. Brandon already talked about inconsistency with patch management. So we walk into sometimes pretty important organizations, financial, healthcare, and otherwise, and we find that they have operating systems both by way of computers and servers that are missing critical and security patches. Now, a quick point about that. We as an organization can patch a lot of stuff with Microsoft, feature packs, things like that. We don't pay attention to those things. Those things are sometimes when you patch with that stuff, it breaks stuff. So we only pay attention to critical and security updates from Microsoft. And we see that some organizations haven't had updates in the past 6, 12, 18 months. And keep in mind, this is what us managed service providers are hired to do. This is one of the foundational things that an IT provider, whether it's internal or external, this is our primary responsibility, is to do this thing. And we still find that so many of them don't do it well. There's a reason for that, by the way. This is hard. I'm not a technical person, but after spending a little over 15 years in this industry, I've found that things that I thought should be easy to do are not. And so I'd invite you to talk with us to explore a little bit more why. I don't want to bore you too much. Antivirus, we walk into organizations and we see that servers and computers don't have antivirus either deployed in some cases, or they're certainly not being managed. And again, to go back to the Target thing, this is the very thing that was missing. That organization that got breached didn't have corporate antivirus, so there's no way for them to audit whether or not their antivirus is being kept up to date. Third-party applications kind of fall in the same line as those things. So we talked about Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Adobe, Java. Those applications need to be managed and updated centrally as well. Stale user accounts. What do I mean by that? So all of us organizations have people that come and go. And when people go, we often find that there's no audit or remediation or getting rid of those old accounts. Now that's important because if Brandon were to leave Success and we didn't audit those accounts and his username and password were to be compromised 6 months from now, and we never retired his account, well, somebody could get in with his old account potentially. So it's important for us to do those things on a frequent basis as well. Legacy equipment, I'm going to focus on firewalls here. We believe that firewalls, the physical appliance needs to be replaced every 3 years. Why? Because the firewall is just another computer with an operating system that after a period of updates gets bloated to the point where the hardware that you bought 3 years ago may not be able to run it as effectively as we need it to. And so we oftentimes see firewalls that have been left in place for 6, 7 years. They don't have any of the security services left up to date. So that's another area that we see that's pretty serious. And then lastly, no offsite backup or no testing. So it's alarming to see that there's no offsite backup. Brandon mentioned earlier having sat in the room with an organization that didn't have access to any data, and that was specifically because they weren't backing it up offsite. And then testing is an important thing to do. So one of our key clients just last Friday, we worked through a test with them just to make sure that things could fail over and we could get back up and running. We could report to the organization as to what the expectation should be for downtime. So this is stuff that we're seeing today. We're seeing this with active businesses that are out there working alongside us. And it's alarming because these are coming from other IT providers. They're coming from other managed service providers. And again, I'm not going to say that they're bad. I think that this is just really hard work to do, and you need to have the resources that can not only do the work to make sure you're being protected, but audit it and remediate it as well. Brandon already went through some of the stuff that you need to consider: regular end user trading, multi-factor authentication. Brandon, if an organization was refused to do anything for security, but they were willing at least to do multi-factor, is that a great step to take?
It's a fantastic step to take. It's not, a lot of people think it's infallible. It's not. A lot of pen testers look at multi-factor as a speed bump, but it is a pretty good deterrent to start there.
Thanks. Any questions, Vanessa? I know that I tend to talk too much and too fast. I just want to make sure and take a breather and give anybody a chance to ask questions.
No questions. Okay.
The other is dark web monitoring, and I know that Brandon, you've mentioned this previously. And if you're not familiar with dark web monitoring, basically what you need to know is, if with any of the many breaches that we've all experienced, LinkedIn comes to mind. I think that happened 6-7 years ago. I can't remember when it was exactly. When those breaches happen, the bad guys sell all that information on the net for many of the other bad guys to leverage and use to their benefit. Dark web monitoring, what it gives us the ability to do is monitor your corporate email address and personal email addresses too for compromise. So we will be able to alert you if you're being bought and sold on the internet, and we can make sure that you're changing passwords and taking evasive measures. Brandon, I'm never really good at talking about the behavioral monitoring aspect of this, but do you mind sharing what that means?
Sure. So and I kind of talked about this a little bit, but I maybe didn't call it out too well. So when we think about behavioral monitoring, it's around looking at that cybersecurity kill chain and understanding what's happening at each point and looking for those types of behavior. So whether it's executing of software that has never been seen in the organization before, or it's that lateral movement across the network, logging into machines that you've never logged into before, getting alerts based on that. When identities or user accounts get elevated privileges, like admin privileges, things like that. Those are the types of things that you're kind of looking for, and you're really looking for what they call IOCs, or indicators of compromise or indicators of attack. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And that breather gave me a moment to note the time. It's 9:57 a.m. I'm going to breeze through a little bit about this to make sure that we get to the majority of what we promised you. So aside from behavioral monitoring, there's also endpoint detection and response. So the key here is, I wrote the new antivirus. Really what I mean by that is antivirus only can detect what's known out there. So it's kind of like, if we know we can protect against measles, there's a vaccine for that. That's what antivirus does. It's kind of like the vaccine for the bad stuff that we know. If Ebola hits, antivirus can't help you there. Endpoint detection and response can account for both what's known and what's unknown, and allows us to gain more control over the device. So I'd encourage you to engage with us. I was going to ask Brandon to go into that in a little more detail, but I want to get to the rest of the presentation. So how do you leverage cybersecurity as a strategic asset? So one thing that's important to know is more and more businesses are requiring standards for baseline security measures prior to contractual work. We've got businesses that are coming to us and they're saying things like, we want to work with a Fortune 50 company, but they say we have to do these 10 things before we work with them, and we're not doing them right now. We need help. So we want to work with businesses to make sure that they can take the right steps and can prove it. And then we want you to also consider how resilience can instill confidence internally and frankly externally as well. And we'll share a little bit about how to make that happen. So I mentioned standards, and this is some language. I'm not going to go through it all. But this is some language from a law firm that specializes in developing those kinds of contracts. So they work with a lot of organizations in the EU and GDPR, and then we've got also the California laws that are making their way east that are going to have an influence over what happens when we sign contracts with businesses or when we want to. The thing I'm going to point out to here is, one, that cybersecurity is being addressed contractually. Two, that you or us sometimes are being obliged to meet, like we're being required to meet them before we can start working with these businesses. And then lastly, they're going to make sure that they can vet our compliance with those standards. So how do you what can you do and how do you prove it? There are organizations that in this market that do a really good job of assessing. So I think it's important to understand where you're at as a business. And we recommend that happen not from your existing IT provider or IT team. We think it's important for you to get an outside entity to do that assessment. There are companies like FR Secure and Whipley and Success, and then other providers that can do these assessments for you. And we want you to start the journey and always consider what's next. Now, what we're starting to see in with some of the organizations that we're part of a peer group organization, we're starting to see more and more that when businesses invest in cybersecurity, they're starting to use the phrases that I've got here in proposal templates to set them apart from some of their competition. So when you go to market and you put something in your proposal that says, we're a cybersecure organization, ask us what we do, that immediately sets you apart from much of the competition because A, many of them don't have the awareness of the things that they need to do, and B, they're not educating their prospects or clients about this, and at some point their clients or prospects are going to ask them to prove these kinds of things. The other thing that helps in making cybersecurity a strategic asset is by building digital resilience. Now, what do we mean by that? Brandon talked earlier about the importance of end user education and testing. Many of you know about KnowBe4. There are other competing tools that can help test your organization, but what happens internally and what we've seen when organizations engage in regular security training and testing is that users feel more empowered and they feel more confident in their business. They feel more confident that their business is doing the right thing to protect them and their clients and their livelihoods. That's a big deal. The other thing that's important to do is to empower your IT or security team. Ask them the hard questions. Where am I vulnerable? Prove to me that you can fix it. What do you need to do it? And as I mentioned earlier, even taking a minimal step can set you apart. And I referenced our peer group involvement earlier. We're fortunate to be a part of a couple of different peer groups, both nationally and locally. And these are conversations that come up on a frequent basis. And I think to the extent that we can share what's actually happening, and this is what part of the problem, in my opinion, when people get hacked, it's just, they take it as a shameful event and they don't want to share anything about it. And as a result, it's this dirty secret that nobody knows. And because many aren't willing to share, that makes the myth of small business not being a target persist. And so we'd like to encourage people to continue talking about it in the circles that they participate in. The last part of our presentation, we're just going to talk about the 4 elements of organizational resilience to cyber attacks. We've talked a lot about the protection of the business and the things that you can do. We've talked about the broadening of awareness to build digital trust. And we'd encourage you to talk to both your customers and vendor partners about it as well. Now, Brandon, I'm going to ask you to wrap things up by just talking about the importance of respond and manage the consequences and recover. And I'm going to ask you to do it briefly out of respect for everyone's time.
Certainly. So really these kind of align with a piece of the NIST framework called IPDRR, which is Identify, Protect, Detect, Respond, and Recover. We kind of lumped 2 into the first one, but the idea here is when you get to respond and manage, you should have an incident response plan. You should know how you're going to respond, and you should test that incident response plan regularly. When I walk into organizations that are in the middle of an incident, it is sheer chaos. You think you know what you're going to be able to do, and you get lost pretty quickly. But if you have that plan, you can pull it out. You can say, okay, first call is to my lawyer, second to cyber security insurance. The team is going to execute in this way. Here is the leaders. This is the people that make decisions. Here are all the phone numbers we need. Here are all the contact information and things like that. If you have that documented and you go through, we call it a tabletop exercise, you're a lot more confident if something happens to respond appropriately. How do I talk to the media? Back to Brent's point, you know, we don't share a lot about what these types of breaches are, but there is a way to talk to the media so that you're protected under, you know, your client privilege with your lawyer and things like that. So there's all these things that go into it. And how do you react to that? You can't create that on the fly. It just doesn't happen. So that's the number 3. Recover is the thing I see fall down the most when I'm sitting in these rooms and having the difficult conversations. If we could recover, it gets a lot easier. It might take more time, but we kind of relax when we have data. And I'll give you just a really quick case in point. I was working on an incident response about a year ago now. Well, not quite that. Anyways, 6 months ago. And we had thought that attackers deleted all the backups. They got in and deleted everything. We had found the backups. There was a set of backups on an offline server, and the tone in the room changed. Gosh, it would be really great if we knew that before we went into that. We knew that the backups were safe. We had offline backups. All of that was described. When one of these attacks happens, it's about executing the response, not are we going to be in business tomorrow. So I think that's part of that last 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, you know, Brandon, thanks for sharing that. One of the important things to consider is just a change in mindset as it relates to the investment in cybersecurity. You're going to have to, whether you want to or not. And you're either going to be forced into it by a supplier, or you're going to do it retroactively and you wish you wouldn't have had to as a result of a breach occurring or something to the effect. I mean, I see Brandon when he's involved in these incidents, and as pretty as he is right now, he looks a little more warm for the wear, I'd say, after a long weekend or a long week of having to deal with those issues. But you can build an awful lot of confidence internally if you're doing these kinds of things, if you're building the kind of awareness and also the plans to deal with the breach, because we can't guarantee it won't happen. But if you do a lot of what we've talked about in this presentation, you become, you are no longer the low-hanging fruit on the internet for the bad guys to go after. And so they will just drive by you potentially if they can't get in easily. And so that's the important point, is a little bit of an investment in cybersecurity can go a long way. And the more you put that investment, or the more that you invest in cybersecurity, the stronger you become to the market, to prospects, to clients, and otherwise. And I think that's it. Brandon, I thought we had talked about, wanted to leave up the links that you had provided, so I'm going to make it back up that way as we round out things, and we'll stay on, of course, for any questions. We want to thank everybody for their time. Brandon, did you have any other parting thoughts?
We had one question about when was the last time I worked a 9-to-5 shift, and my response was a long time ago.
Yeah, I see you busy on weekends on a regular basis. If it's either working on behalf of a client, or it's putting some kind of measure in place internally to further protect our organization. So thank you for all that you do for us and our clients. Any other questions? Again, we're grateful for your commitment of time today. We hope this was valuable. I know that there will be a survey available to you to share some feedback with us. We know we've got a little bit of some audio issues to work on, and we promise to do that. But if you've got any other comments, we'd be grateful to hear from you. Thank you very much for your time.